talk about pricing. Recall that the ultimate goal of all this departmental and service line costing is so that we could price the services, right? That's the ultimate goal. In the last lecture, we got the costs framed up for the services. So let's talk about some theory on pricing. Obviously, we use managerial accounting to do the work um, with the goal of pricing. Obviously, it's an important concept. Um, the ability to, to capture the revenue greater than the cost of providing the service, fairly obvious. Certainly, no, McDonald's, Apple, et cetera, et cetera. They don't typically price below their cost. I think Costco, the hot dog and a drink is below their cost, but they're bringing people in the store like me to get $1.50 hot dog and a drink, and then see all those things and walk out spending 200 bucks. So let's talk about price setters versus price takers, price makers versus price takers. Um, so when a provider has market dominance, it said it has more power to set its own price. It's said to be a price setter or a price maker, kind of interchangeable. Um, it's got dominance. So, like a single provider, if you're the only hospital in town in a smaller market, that's why your major for-profit companies like HCA, they're not in Chicago. They've tried to be in Chicago and they've gotten their rear end kicked. I live next door in Nashville to a senior executive at HCA that in the early 2000s they tried to get into Chicago market and they just lost their shirt. They don't know how to compete in a big market for the most part. So they're mostly trying to do like a Memphis or Little Rock or smaller mid-sized markets where they can have more relative power. There's less providers. The less market dominance, the less power providers are price takers. So a perfectly competitive market, that's kind of the classic Econ 101. Um, yeah, Illinois, you got Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois is the big dog in town. Um, and you've got a lot of options for healthcare, a lot of, tertiary centers, etc. And then, I mean, the biggest one of all is probably, right, CMS, Medicare and Medicaid services. We don't negotiate our prices with the government. Government tells us what they're going to pay. Um, okay, but it's rarely that black and white between price setters and price takers. Um, there's some room for negotiation. So I had you read the paper I wrote many years ago, um, and I read it annually. I think it still holds up. Uh, the principles still apply, and I hope you got a greater background on the issue of perfectly competitive versus markets versus competitive advantage. So this all drives down to basic econ 101. To the extent that your industry or market looks more perfectly competitive than it does monopolistic or oligarchical, I guess, um, you can't influence or negotiate price, right? To the extent it's perfectly competitive. So your strategy has to be reducing costs to survive. So this equates to a price taker, and this this is soybeans and corn in Illinois. It's a pretty perfectly competitive market. The only thing you can do is find out how to get more yield out of an acre, i.e., lower your cost per acre. The less the market's perfectly competitive, the more likely you can influence prices and be a price setter. Um, there's other level levers you can market. I think reputation is pretty important because reputation drives demand. So in a perfectly competitive market, there basically is no reputation. My college fraternity brother runs a farm. His corn is really no. He doesn't market his corn any different from the guy down the street. It's just corn. Um, so there's no. I mean, you probably have a bad reputation, I guess, if you for business practices. But as far as the corn itself, it's the same seed that the guy down the street's planting. But in healthcare, you do have some ability with reputation to drive demand. I mean, obviously, the the most prominent example nationally is somebody like the Mayo Clinic. People come from all over the country to go to the Mayo Clinic. I don't want to overstate reputation, but it is a factor. If you're Blue Cross and the employers are demanding, XYZ hospital system because their employees are demanding it of their employers, that's going to increase your negotiating leverage. When we when I started years ago at this large practice, and they had United, and they had a management company that got to United, but the United network didn't have, I don't want to name any names, but certain hospitals in the Chicago area that had a very good reputation for specific items, let's say neurosurgery, cancer treatment. And our physicians, knew enough about the market, and by the time I got there, they really wanted us to have a health plan that had this specific hospital in network because of their reputation. So that hospital has a little bit more negotiating leverage. In my opinion, and we'll get to it in a little bit more. I think the biggest driver is just basic econ 101, supply and demand. So Chicago has a lot more providers. People want to live in Chicago. So it really has relatively low rates. The providers are paid relatively low to someplace like Rockford. So Rockford, the rates are the physician gets paid, and presumably hospital as well, are significantly greater than they are in Chicago. But no offense, you know, not as many people want to live in Rockford as they want to live in, Oak Park or Evanston or whatever, Glen Ellen, etc. Downtown Chicago, Lincoln Park, So there's a trade off. Alaska, where I used to live many years ago, the provider rates are enormously high. I mean, they're they. I mean, I haven't looked at it in a while, but they're probably double Illinois. But you gotta live in Alaska, and I can tell you it's a great place. In the summer, but it can be pretty darn cold in the winter from experience. So again, supply and demand. So when we're a price setter, um, there's some theoretical bases which we can set prices. Um, the textbook mentions full cost pricing, marginal cost pricing. I have a third one, and I wish I could find the reference to this, but I remember driving down the street. It was an NPR interview, um, and it was somebody who kind of one of the problems of what American healthcare is. The pricing strategy is just get as much as you can get, and that's why we're so expensive. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So it's unrelated to some of these theoretical concepts. Full cost pricing. What's our margin? Marginal cost pricing. It's especially with new technology or things that the payer world hasn't caught up with yet. I wish I could get that reference, but it really, as I was driving my car, it really struck with me from what I've seen in my career. So, full cost pricing is, again, I think I mentioned this before. It's kind of has how Apple probably did the iPhone, right? They looked at their costs, they decided what their profit component should be, and they came up with a price. So they fully loaded all these costs, overhead allocation, direct, fixed. I mean, they have the same issues internally, right? Allocation of marketing and accounting and HR to factor in their prices. And they wanted to make sure that the iPhone, when they first came out with it, you know, covered all those costs and gave them, right, probably a significantly big profit. Target costing is more of a strategy by price takers. So you're just assuming what the market will bear. I mean, basically, that's Illinois healthcare. Blue Cross, for the most part, in the Chicago area, has a standard physician rate that they pay every provider. It's not negotiable, right? If you're, again, I think I mentioned this before, if you're came out with an Android phone, you've got a ceiling, right? You probably have to price it a little less than the iPhone when it first came out. So you're a price taker. So now your focus is on driving down your cost till you get the profit level you want. So your focus is like we have to really be laser focused on this. I mean, I'm just a little pedantic here. I mean, my opinion, regardless if you're a price setter or taker, you, you probably always want to lower the cost anyway, right? You're probably always looking to lower the cost. You're probably always looking to maximize profit because the world is dynamic. It doesn't change. The economic marketplace is always dynamic. Nuts and bolts. If any of you do managed care contracting or head there, I mean, my assessment is 80% of your pricing, if you're on the managed care team of a hospital or a large physician group, etc., it's supply and demand. It's basic econ 101. I just laugh when I hear all these politicians talk about, you know, this and that strategy, and they just forget about basic econ 101. The more providers in a given market, right, is bad for pricing, right? It's just super supply basics. Then on the demand side, what drives demand? So at a macro level, volume, patient volume, demographics. I mean, in orthopedics, what I've been associated with since 2008, It's a good place to be because the baby boomers, were aging and their joints were wearing out. And if you look at some of the statistics, that we looked at in 2008, the demand for total joint surgery was like growing at double digits every year. And we, hired total joint surgeons. We developed surgery centers with total joint capacity. So orthopedics now, now we've got, now we've got pickleball, and all the people my age going out there thinking they're, 20 years old again, and blowing out their knees, uh, uh, and their ACLs playing pickleball. So there's a demand, right? And as the baby boomers age, you're going to see increased demand in, certain specific areas, right? Not obstetrics, but unfortunately things like memory care and orthopedics. At a micro level, we kind of talked about this reputation, obviously for clinical excellence. I don't think payers really care about clinical excellence as much as they have you believe. We'll talk about that later. What I've seen, but it does have some factor. The other big thing is what can you do for them? Do you have a reputation? So, Hinsdale Orthopedics, we'd been what started in 1949, good reputation out in the suburbs. We had the second contract with Blue Cross Blue Shield to do outpatient joints, and I think part of that we had to do a whole bunch of. It wasn't just a function of price and everything else. We had to put together a whole thing and present presentations. But we had doctors that on staff that actually trained people on outpatient joints nationally. We had two spine doctors that were leaders in the pedicle screw development that made kind of fusion surgery viable. So that kind of reputation, and it at least got us in the door, right? And then it became a matter of, okay, what can we do for you, Blue Cross? So, well, we can move these to outpatient and save you a lot of money. And now let's contract based on now let's contract at a price that's that we're leveraging against what the hospital would charge, and there's a big difference. So again, I think this is 80% of it. 20% of it is just how good your team is, your managed care team. Do they fight and claw for every dollar? And I got to tell you, it's in my career, I've gone into places it's not common. They just dropped the ball, the managed care team. So that hospital example I gave early on, the one where I didn't get the job, I said the CFO left. Well, he was actually fired. They had not renegotiated any managed care contracts for 5 years. And, I, don't ask me why, but pretty bad. When we took over this surgery center, when we bought it in 2016, it had gone through two owners, prior owners, and management companies, and one I won't mention, but supposedly sophisticated. There had been no contract negotiations since 2000. I mean, 8 or 7. I mean, all the contracts I think were 2008 or 7. So I get in there and we're way low. And now I'm fighting and clawing to get us back up to market. So you can't underestimate just basic, a good team that fights and claws. that knows the tricks that they're going to do. That knows that United Healthcare is going to delay and delay till you hit an automatic renewal clause in the contract and get another year out of you. I, you know which payers are going to deal with you straight and which ones are going to not be reputable. I mean, I've in my career, I think I've sued, I don't know, half a dozen, not paying to the contract, not dealing fairly, not adhering to the terms. So you need a really good team that's going to fight and claw for every dollar. I mean, these are things you're not going to read in a textbook, but because the textbooks tend to be theoretical. But this is where the rubber meets the road. Okay, so let's talk about some pricing on individual services, kind of more from the theory. So, example one, you've got projected data, you've got $10 variable cost per visit, fixed costs of 100, you've got overhead allocated, which for all intents and purposes is going to be fixed of 25,000, you got visits of 5,000. What price must be set to achieve break even, zero profit, to achieve $100,000 profit? So it's just like back to chapter 5, but kind of in reverse order. So what we do, we set up our data table. Our assumptions are in blue, right? And we got to solve for price, and we always want to solve for contribution margin per unit, and that's going to be very important in this calculation anyway. But remember, I always said we that gives us information, so we want to figure out what the break even and the profit, the price to get to these, to break even, and then the volume to achieve whatever profit we're looking at. So it's pretty straightforward. Just follow this along with the homework. You start with your fixed costs plus your overhead allocation, which in this example is a fixed cost. You add in your desired profit. So if you build a model, the model looks the same whether there's desired profit or not. You just desired profit is zero versus whatever you know you want it to be. You add those three things together, so you get your fixed cost plus your overhead plus your desired profit, right? And then you divide it by the number of visits. And what does that tell you? That tells you what the contribution margin needs to be in order to achieve your goal, right? And so if price less variable cost equals contribution margin plus variable cost equals price. So you take the model calculates what the contribution margin per visit needs to be. Your assumption tells you what variable cost is. You add the two together, you get price per visit. Pretty straightforward. So it's just kind of like a reverse of what we did before. And if you look, I'm not going to load up Excel, but you build a model. So this will, be your guide for the homework. You got your fixed cost B5, right? Overhead allocation, which again for this purposes is fixed. B6. Um, in this case, desired profit is zero for the break even. You can leave it blank. Uh, you add those three together, right? B14, 15, 16. You divide it by the number of visits, B3. It gives you the contribution margin needed, B17, divided by B18. You add in your variable cost, B4, price per visit, B19 plus B20. So it's a very simple model. You build it with formulas. You play around with the estimates of volume and variable cost and desired profit. It calculates what you need it to calculate. Then you want to see if it works. You want to build a P&L. Then you just do a traditional P&L. You got your revenue, which is your price per volume, less your variable cost times your right per unit times your volume. You get your contribution margin. You subtract your fixed and overhead allocation. You get your profit and loss. Another example too. Again, um, volume estimates 20,000. Variable costs are 20. Fixed costs are 500,000. Again, desired profit. We want to know break even. We want to know desired profit. So again, you can follow along pretty easily here. We get our total fixed costs. We divide it by the number of visits. It gives us our contribution margin needed. We add our variable costs. It gives us our price. Okay. So, and then we do a P&L. We get our price times volume, variable cost per unit times volume, less our fixed costs. We get our profit, make sure it works. It's nice to make sure to check your work with a P&L statement. Okay, so marginal cost pricing, we might have touched on it a tiny bit before. So under marginal cost pricing, prices for services are set to cover the incremental or marginal costs. So you're only getting your basically you're only covering your variable costs. Can you survive if all the services are priced at marginal costs? No, because you got to cover your fixed costs to survive. We're going to talk about race to the bottom, discounting your way to oblivion. It's really tempting to uh, to price to to cover your variable costs to get new business, because as long as you're making right, as long as your contribution margin is positive, you're helping to contribute to fixed costs and profit. So it's kind of tempting if there's no other alternative. But it's dangerous, and we'll talk about it in a second. So we take a, let's say this is our basic P&L model here. We have a volume of 75,000, revenue of 100, variable cost. Again, these notes are just kind of like how I might present it if I was presenting it. Revenue per visit per market survey with Blue Cross. I might have a detailed schedule of what these costs are if somebody's interested. I've calculated my contribution margin per unit. I've done the break even formula, fixed cost divided by contribution margin per unit. And again, I actually do get this kind of granular sometimes because I'm historically, especially the last 15 years or so, I'm speaking to a physician audience. They might not have a finance background. Very few of them do. So I'll actually do something like this. Where I'll explain the calculation for them. Again, the goal of every great spreadsheet model is they don't have to ask you any questions. They can just see it. Okay, so we have our revenue less our variable costs. We got our contribution margin less our fixed costs, and we have our profit and loss. So pretty standard. So let's say that Peachtree HMO represents 1/3 of the clinic's volume, and they want a 40% discount on the 25,000 visits that they represent. So 1/3 of 75,000 is 25,000, and they want a 40% discount. So 100, you know, $100 less 40%, $60 per visit. So they hired someone from United Healthcare, which believe me happens in the market. And this person's like a lot more aggressive. So they say, hey, we're a 30-year business. We want a big discount. So the accountant's view is going to be, look, the average cost when I take all my costs and I divide it by my volume, the average cost is $94. Don't go pound sand. I need I need $100. There's no way. The economist's view is $60 per visit still creates a positive contribution margin, right? 60 minus the 28.18 in variable costs is still positive contribution margin, so you accept it. Economists, as long as the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost, accepting the proposal equals greater profit. Well, I mean, yeah, if your alternative is losing the business, they're completely right. Again, here's the other side. That's all fine and good, economists, but what happens when Blue Cross finds out that you just gave Peachtree $60 a visit and they're paying 100? Are they going to sit around and say, oh well, okay? No, they're going to hire someone from United too, and then they're going to want $60 a visit. And so that's where we get this concept of race to the bottom. Once the race to the bottom happens, then if everyone's pricing at $60, ouch. And there's no good answer to a lot of this. So the economist view, then I've just kind of broken it up as kind of aligned with the homework. So the economists, what we've done is we've just broken up the lines of business into kind of with the Peachtree business and everything else. So the economists would say 25,000 times $60, right? Less the contribute, right? Less your variable cost. You're 3182. It's better than It's still positive contribution margin. You got your other business 50,000 visits at $100. Variable costs the same. Obviously, you have a greater one, and the fixed costs. I mean, you have those regardless, so you just kind of pull those off to the side. So if we, this is our assumption table because we always build nice, clear assumption tables. Highlight our assumptions in blue. Use whatever color you like. But again, when you look back at this thing 3 months later, you immediately know what's an assumption, what's a formula if you've color coded. So you do a little P&L on your Peachtree business. You do a little P&L on everything else. You add it together. You take away your fixed costs. So you went from making $419,000 to losing 580. So you tell the economist says, okay, well, what if you lose the Peachtree business, right? So your volume's 50, revenue's 100 still, variable cost is 28. Your fixed costs haven't changed. So now you've got 5 million less your variable costs, less your fixed costs, and you've lost 1.3 million. So the economist says, well, would you rather lose 1.37, 1.3 million in change, or would you rather lose $580,000? And you can't argue with that. The problem is, again, what happens when Blue Cross wants $60 too? And that's there's no easy answer. So it's harder to discount when you have the business and they're threatening to take it away, because you can see the results. These are the same fact patterns, but kind of in reverse. Let's say you don't have Peachtree HMO. You start out without Peachtree HMO. So you've got 50,000, you got your revenue of 100, et cetera, et cetera. So you start out losing 1.3 million. And then Peachtree comes to you because maybe they had the same exact conversation with your rival, and the rival told them to go pound sand. So Peachtree comes to you and says, "We can't afford to pay 100. We can afford to pay 60." And now you do the math. You start negative 1.3 million and change, and Peachtree comes at 60. It's greater than your right variable costs. You got contribution margin, and you can go from losing 1.3 to only losing 580 and change. So that's kind of a very standard, very common scenario. So maybe you don't have it. It's harder for the payer to take away 40%. I mean, you have contracts, etc. You have a history of that. But someone new comes to town and says, "Hey, we're the new guys. Can't really afford to pay you, but we got the sweet offer for you. You'll be better off." That's where it gets tough. But again, you have the same issue. You take the deal, and then Blue Cross finds out, whoa, we're the big dog, and you're giving these newbies 40% less than us. And I'll tell, and okay, well, we're the big dog. We want $55. Again, the race to the bottom. And I can tell you, we're not gonna. Blue Cross is the big dog in Illinois. And my philosophy is nobody gets a better deal than Blue Cross. I mean, if they're 80% of the volume or 70% of the volume, don't even come to me and say you're going to pay me less than Blue Cross. I mean, you're right. You give the big volume people traditionally a little better deal than the smaller players. So the concept is, again, I'm not saying what's right or wrong for your particular situation. You just have to be aware of the pitfalls. Now, when does pricing on the margin work? Pricing on the margin works when you can price discriminate. Now, I'm going to leave you to read this. It's pretty good from Investopedia. But basically, and again, this isn't illegal discrimination under the civil rights law. This is economic price discriminations, and you can read the technical. Basically, if you could subdivide the market in a way that they don't bleed into each other, you can charge different. You can just price discriminate. So the classic is when I'm 65 years old. I don't really go to the movies on Saturday night with my wife that much. Like we'll go on a Wednesday night, or we'll just stay in and watch Netflix. So they want to encourage me, and a lot of seniors are on fixed income, right? They're retired. They don't have the same disposable money. When I was 20, or when I was in my 20s and I was dating, I didn't think anything of paying whatever it was go on a date and pay whatever for the movie ticket and buy the popcorn that's ridiculously priced, et cetera, et cetera. I'm dating, I'm young, I want to get out there. So they've got to induce me and my wife to get off the couch. So I get a senior discount at the movie theater. Okay, so they've price discriminated because, you know, I'm older, and they know that they can give me a discount, and they don't have to give it to you young folks who are still out there motivated to go to the movie or see the latest show. So there's no race to the bottom issue because we've discriminated into basically two separate markets. They also have it within an age group. You know, the first matinee at the movie theater at 12 o'clock in the afternoon is cheaper than it is at 7 o'clock. So they're discriminating based on they want to bring those people in, the people that can't afford to pay whatever it is. I'll just say $20. I don't know. People that can't afford to pay $20 or aren't motivated to pay 20, well, then maybe they'll pay 10. Okay, so they go at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They discriminated based on a way to subdivide the market. So you know, when I was in my 20s, I'm not asking some, woman I met, hey, do you want to go to the matinee at 1 o'clock on a date? I don't know how it is now, but it probably wouldn't have gone over well. No, let's go at 1 o'clock so I can save $10 a ticket. So that's price discrimination. You're segregating the market. I mean, you can read the official definitions. So if you can, that will prevent the race to the bottom problem. So again, um, I'm not saying what to do. You just you just got to be careful. Now in the real world, Medicare is priced on the margin. Medicare does not pay the full cost, right? But we don't have a choice. So, this may be a little, numbers may not be exactly exact. It changes. But, at one time, Medic, when I first did this slide, Medicare was paying 87, 84 for a total knee, and the hospital was getting 12K. So Medicare was discriminating based on the theoretical that the hospital outpatient provides a greater capacity or greater quality baloney. We turned it down initially, or even, I mean, we didn't turn down the price because we don't have that ability, but we just didn't do any Medicare. And over time, it's greater than our marginal cost or our variable cost. So it's kind of hard to turn it down. And Blue Cross or anybody wasn't rumbling about it if that they paid more, and so we started to do Medicare joints. It's really tempting, but we thought the price discrimination between the two markets was enough that Blue Cross or the other payers weren't going to come back to us. Now, for the industry as a whole, it's just a little side note. It's kind of hard. Why there's why there's such pushback on Medicare for all, right? Is because Medicare doesn't pay the full cost of care. So if we look at some statistics here, cumulative Medicaid and Medicare underpayments. So you know, for this 4 year period, 375 billion, and then for this 4 year period, 522 billion. So, Medicare on average, this is data from the AHA, pays 87, Medicaid pays 87.6% of costs, which I find that hard to believe it's that high because Medicaid traditionally pays 80% of Medicare, but who am I to argue with the AHA? They probably make it up on disproportionate share payments. It's probably the difference. Medicare pays 86.8% of the cost. Commercial insurance pays 144.8. So Medicaid, Medicare are priced basically on the margin by the government. If you had single payer at Medicare rates, you're it's game over. So I'm not. The summary here is I'm not being didactic about what to do if you're offered kind of a pricing on the margin agreement. It's not for me to say. It's really, really tempting to take them because it's like found money if you don't have the business already. And every economist would say take it. And I'm an accountant. I respect it. You just have to be careful of the feedback loop. You just have to be careful of the potential ramifications in doing so. So, in summary, to kind of wrap up, the textbook a little theoretical on the pricing. The practical application here, if you're ever in the kind of the managed care realm as part of your job, you just got to work hard at it. A lot of it is going to be given by market dynamics, but there is room for a competent approach to negotiating contracts and just basic you know doing your job and not letting it slide. It's not it's probably the least fun thing that I did in my career, because some of the pairs were just, again, I think I said I sued about a half a dozen of them. Just not good ethical folks. And when you arguing over what to get paid, they obviously want to pay you the least, and you want them to pay the most. So doesn't have to be adversarial, but at least it's theoretically adversarial at the start. Okie doke, that wraps it up.